是江泽民的第二件事情，第三件事情。
第三个事情，他军委当2年军委主席，这是
对不下来。
我说了，我在国外不管怎么样吧，还小
不上马，生一统，他就是不放权嘛，带胡锦涛，
对吧？这个你不是邓小平，邓小平是军委主席又干了一段，对吧？全策略全部支武器之后，这个因为我在国外做评论过，谈过问题，就是基本没失误过的，这个算我失手了，所以我说了一个我无能，他无耻，这个非常不好啊。这个书里我回去之后，中办找我了，我没有啊，我说和平过这个，在说的时候，我说我不敢说，我说我是无能啊，没人说我无耻，有人说我无能，对吧？啪多页，这我就给我写了我无能无耻，我说不好意思，当时笔误，你跟首长道歉，这个确实我不该这么说。我说真有那页，就是关于他在当2年军委主席的时候，我说我无能，他无耻，拿着白纸黑字就我的书上有这话，中办拿出来了。
江泽民看了这个吗？
我不知看没看，反正是他不一定这么仔细，但是他下面的秘书，下面那班子人看得很仔细，我都忘了，对吧？600页，
对，
其中每页又是20-30行，对吧？每行又是30个字，现在俩字他们看着了，说了我不承认呢，没有，我说开玩笑，我说和平上说了，我没敢说，我说我是，对吧？无能，好多人说我无能，但没人说我无耻。我记得咱们讨论的时候，我说不敢说的话嘛，啪多页拿出来了，那我就承认跟首长道歉的，就是，但这个事确实是非常不好的。人家说胡锦涛也有学长吧，10年无作为，一朝裸退有情势，是吧？10年碌碌无作为嘛，确实是10年。但是这点他是中共党史上第一个
把权力交代彻底干干净净，
是主动的。开玩笑，不像我们敬爱赵子阳同志是被动的撤得干干净净的。开玩笑，那是个真的，对吧？确实，假如江泽民当时要这么做的话，就没锦涛事了。他就是中国历史上第一个人。
对，但是对，
你遥控嘛，你对不对？你选一个好的军委副主席，你控制得了吧？不行，你那个对吧？
他也搞得非常狼狈。
是啊，非常
狼狈到什么程度呢？就是你地方上打报告报告党中央、国务院，比如说上海市委报告中央什么事情，但不能写中央中委主席呀。所以呢，就被人耗得很荒唐。胡锦涛一看到这个文件应该给泽民同志看一看，所以就说，请泽民同志看一看，你理解吗？这个文本，
政府怎么给中央军委主席
打
报告啊？
所以呢，很多地方的资料这都是由胡锦涛批给这个江泽民，很多人不大了解我呢大概了解这个能力嘛，
对，是很被动的，
很被动，很狼狈，所以耗得他搞得很无趣，
对呀，
所以就只好退下来了。
我觉得一点意思没有吧？是吧？
对，
就是你高明点，你遥控嘛，对不对？你让你那个贾庆林是吧？就一个这个电子部小秘书嘛，也上将了，跟那个
不是贾庆林，贾庆安，
对，不好意思老人时代，
那是电子工业部部长的时候，他在走廊上看到一个小伙子，怎么没有座位啊？他们说，当时中央机关很多地方都没有办公室啊，也能够在走廊上放一张桌子是不错了。原来把小贾就叫到里面去聊了天，这个小伙子不错，就成为了他的秘书，然后他就类似于这个王玉林的角色。
对呀，王玉林是原来是警卫秘书，当过兵的，当民的，对吧？老板和那个下面秘书都没当过兵，江泽民1天兵没当过，贾庆安是吧？
对，
平安1天兵没当过，好也上将，也跟那个特种兵那个王玉林学，
对，
不能学嘛。假如你新学可以啊，给他弄个军委副主席，进遥控，你就彻底退得了嘛。
你之前去八一大楼有没有见到贾庆安呀？
没有。
你可能也忘记了。
对，但是我写了好几个写信，他就告我这途径，中央办公厅贾庆安说下面写上延托。这样他就知道了，他就不看，就那大新闻的小新闻就给降了。这个我这么办过，我这边写了，我妹妹这么办过，一个叫这个
就是跟江写信什么事情？
他是弘扬这个就是这个国际货币组织的成员， 在中国被判了10年徒刑。
然
后我当时在新加坡，我不认识的事儿，我就写了，不能随便抓国际组织国际组织的雇员也要准外交人员的性质的，对吧？你要这么随便抓，谁那个世界银行啊，谁敢到怎么派人去，对不对？结果他是我妹妹同学，我妹妹通过途径呢，贾天案子转给江，结果10几年就变成5年了。我讲事情，我没讲肯定是起诉了。做了5年，这个洪洋还不干，还在那个要上诉，人说，别闹了，你待不了5年的，你去打招了，结果3年就出去了。就我不说是我讲事情，我不讲肯定是归因不好归，但是确实就是我讲嘛，就讲这个我写的封信，就是我是书上写了，就他以为是我们那个发行人严某好像说的事儿，我没有，发行人对我举例子了，像民出版社这发行人，像金钟发行人，我这个发行人嘛，对吧？他就化名说他坏话似的，他讲那个当时那个谁呀，就是日本那个杨什么写的，这个乔石7人讲的事儿，
对，
有些事儿他们那个探索知道是了，他以为就我知道给说出去的，就只是说我不该化名在外面就是说的坏话，我说没那回事，我这发行人我哪搞发行人呢？这是何老板，那个金钟老板的发行人
，OK，
给 copy 给他看了，对，就这个事儿。
OK， 好，第4件事情有没有？
哎呦，10把手说人的坏话，是不是？我是绞尽脑汁呢。我提过我特别觉得这3个代表好，说没说过？说好话行不行
？OK，
那第4个就，不该让我回去。我回去了，这6年你看了对吧？因为我说出来了，这6年没少的乱。最后一个事儿是20大，他给写封信，是吧？这个在20大一片寂静之声，是吧？先是诺诺，不如一是恶。
这个事情我们以后再说。
对，
我们。
欢迎来到6度解析，我们为您带来南华早报报道：中国必须做些什么才能避免日本式的衰退？经济学家 Richard Koo 解释为何中国的情况更加严重。在中国前所未有的经济动荡中， Koo 警告称，如果所谓的资产负债表衰退成型，后果可能会很严重。Koo 的理论在全球金融危机后影响了西方政策。现在，他对中国政策制定者和失望的年轻人提出了强烈建议。野村综合研究所首席经济学家 Richard Koo 曾就经济问题向多位日本首相提供建议。他因详细阐述资产负债表衰退的概念，并解释其如何导致日本所谓的大萧条而闻名。这篇采访首次出现在 SCMP Plus。阅读我们完整的开放问题系列，请点击这里。典型的衰退被认为是商业周期波动的自然结果，而资产负债表衰退则以高水平的私营部门债务为特征，导致储蓄增加，从而导致经济放缓，因为家庭消费减少和企业投资下降。当大多数发达国家正在应对高通胀时，中国的消费价格已经连续1年多每月上涨不到 1%， 因为消费者在储蓄。许多企业在等待政府出台重大刺激措施后再扩大投资。在此类措施出台之前， Koo 与记者 Frank Chen 讨论了中国经济面临的问题、日本的教训以及北京应如何制定其应对措施和政策组合。Koo 先生，在高债务水平和房地产危机，您认为可能导致资产负债表衰退的2个潜在原因引发的经济不确定性中，中国面临这种困境的风险是什么？我多次受邀在中国大陆演讲，并参与了一些政策辩论。很多经济学家担心中国可能会陷入资产负债表衰退，但也有其他看法。尽管中国第1季度 GDP 增长率达到了 5.3%， 许多人仍然感到沮丧，不知道在贸易紧张局势如此高涨的情况下，制造业驱动的增长是否能够持续。一些人认为经济问题是结构性改革，与资产负债表无关。他们认为，如果我们只进行一点货币和财政刺激，一切都会好起来。 这些是我们30年前在日本听到的典型论点，当时日本的问题开始出现。日本不断尝试各种结构改革政策，但用了20年才走出困境。另一方面，美国在2008年金融危机后的衰退初期也有这些论点，但在头2年内，前美联储主席本·伯南克读了我的书，并意识到这是一次资产负债表衰退。一旦他意识到这一点，他就开始推动财政刺激，著名的财政悬崖一词，这与他最初认为货币政策可以解决所有这些问题的判断相违背。因此，美国相对较快地走出了那次衰退。顶级欧洲政策制定者完全不接受资产负债表衰退理论，因此他们不断推动结构性改革，浪费了几年时间。欧洲用了几乎2倍于美国的时间才走出同样的资产负债表衰退。因此，如果你采取正确的政策，就会相对较快地走出衰退。但如果不这样做，你可能会陷入困境很长时间。中国能从日本的失去的30年中吸取教训吗？所以，您的建议是，中国政策制定者应该关注如何降低资产负债表衰退的风险，并致力于现在采取相关措施吗？是的。关于财政刺激的规模，我说，如果你要犯错，确保你犯的是刺激规模过大的错误，而不是过小的错误。必须要大，因为资产负债表衰退可以很快摧毁经济。如果刺激规模太小，经济开始迅速恶化，而且只在那时你才决定实施更大的刺激，那么成本将比你一开始就采取适当规模的刺激要大得多。如果你让中国经济遭受严重的打击，然后试图帮助它恢复，后果可能会很严重，因为它的规模和在全球的影响力。那些对中国资产负债表衰退持怀疑态度的人给我的回应是，我们在2008年尝试了大规模刺激，几年后产生了各种问题，所以我们不想重蹈覆辙。这似乎是现在的主要考虑因素。这是我的反驳。当中国政府在2008年11月宣布4万亿人民币计划以维持 8% 的增长时，全世界的经济学家都在嘲笑他们。他们问，在全球经济崩溃，中国股票到那时已从高峰下跌 70% 的情况下，中国如何能维持这样的增长？但1年后，中国在2010年第1季度记录了 11.9% 的增长，没有人再笑了。这种增长在不小的程度上恢复了信心，因为人们曾以为中国会像美国、欧洲和日本一样下滑，而更多的信心帮助增加了消费和投资，使经济再次运转起来。当然，4万亿人民币计划在之后的确有点过大，带来了太多的债务和过度投资。所以，教训是你先实施大规模刺激，赢回政府能维持增长的信心。然后，一旦你让经济再次运转起来，就开始减少刺激。在2008年的经验中，中国在下一年记录了更高的增长，所以中国应该开始削减计划。我认为我们今天也需要一个大规模的计划，而且这个计划应该是长期的，以确保人们的信心。当人们感到有信心时，有些人实际上可能会增加消费和投资，然后我们可以更快地摆脱困境。所以，你需要一个非常有保障的计划，比如5年。如果在第2年经济已经恢复，你可以开始削减计划，以防止经济过热。所以，您现在呼吁中国展现2008年那样的决断力和决心吗？如果今天有刺激措施，它的规模应该有多大？鉴于中国经济现在大得多，你需要超过4万亿人民币，约合5520亿美元。对于公告部分，我会推荐一个非常大的计划，并且需要向人们解释为什么我们现在需要它。如果我是财政部长，我会在电视上解释，看，私营部门正在进行资产负债表修复。问题是，人们都在做正确的事情，试图恢复财务健康和修复资产负债表。但如果每个人同时这样做，你会摧毁经济。这就是我们所说的构成谬误。而且，我们必须尽量不提前削减刺激，因为这是日本1997年犯下的一个巨大错误。1990年泡沫破裂时，日本实施了刺激措施， 所以 GDP 增长得以维持。顺便说一下，日本的 GDP 从未跌破泡沫的峰值。这尽管商业地产价值在全国范围内下跌了87%，而1989年日本损失的财富相当于3年的 GDP， 这是一个了不起的成就。但在1997年，国际货币基金组织和经济合作与发展组织告诉日本，你的预算赤字太大，你应该停止。当时我在为首相桥本龙太郎提供建议，我是唯一一个反对削减刺激的人。我说，如果你削减，经济将会崩溃。但首相决定削减，然后日本连续5个季度负增长，银行系统完全崩溃。最终，日本的预算赤字也增加了。日本用了10年时间才将赤字恢复到1996年的水平，才走出困境。1997年的那个错误浪费了日本10年。我希望中国不要重复在私营部门仍在修复资产负债表时过早取消刺激的错误。只有当私营企业开始重新借贷时，那才是取消刺激的时机。具体来说，首先，北京应该不惜一切代价完成所有未完工的房屋。原因是，如果你想做一个大规模的刺激，你必须提出一个计划，说明你将把钱投入哪些项目。但规划出一系列项目并设计它们需要时间，可能需要1年半。这意味着在经济已经恶化时，你可能会在这个过程中浪费大量时间。如果中国政府用这笔钱完成未完工的公寓，这将使资金更快地在经济中流通。然后你召集中国最优秀的人才，提出能够获得超过 2.4% 社会回报率的新项目。我说社会回报率是因为如果私营部门投资基础设施项目，它不会收集所有的利益，因为经济学家所说的外部性，或者说是未反映在市场价格中的经济活动对其他人或事物的影响。但政府可以收集这些外部性。为什么是 2.4%？ 因为中国10年期国债收益率是 2.4%。所以，如果项目收益超过这个水平，它将在财政上自给自足，以支付利息，不会成为未来纳税人的负担。而资产负债表衰退的一个关键特征是，在私营部门去杠杆化时，国债收益率会降到平时无法想象的水平。所以，现在先完成所有未完工的房屋，同时准备好财政上可行的、随时可以启动的项目，以便在1年左右的时间内启动。向这些购房者交付房屋也会增强信心。很多人已经将所有积蓄作为首付款投入。中国面临通缩压力，您曾写过关于人口威胁和劳动力萎缩的风险。看起来中国具备了30年前日本经历的所有症状。如果中国面临日本化，它能学到什么教训？中国目前面临的是停滞和人口萎缩老龄化的结合。日本的人口在泡沫破裂后的19年里仍在增长，但在中国，人口下降和泡沫破裂几乎在同一时间开始，大约在2022年和2023年。所以，中国的情况比30年前的日本更加严重。对于用借来的钱买房的购房者，他们希望确保公寓的价值会上升。但如果人口在减少，就不会这样。在中国的大多数地方，除了顶级城市外，很难说房价会继续上涨。人口减少正在加剧中国的资产负债表衰退，因为人们对房价恢复或上涨的预期减少。这是日本从未担心的问题，因为当时人口仍在增加。所以，今天的中国可能面临更深的悬崖，因为人口下降几乎与资产负债表衰退和通缩的出现同时开始。另一方面，中国相对于日本的最大优势在于，许多中国人已经在讨论资产负债表衰退。在1990年代的日本，没有人知道这种病症。如果中国政府利用这个优势并实施大规模刺激，那么可能什么都不会发生，因为经济可能不会崩溃。30年前的日本，我们从未意识到私营部门即使在零利率下也会选择最小化债务。因为这在我们的经济学教科书中没有。我们浪费了很多时间做错事，然后让资产价格崩溃。 但如果中国明白发生了什么，向公众解释这是一次资产负债表衰退，并确保人们政府不会在私营部门资产负债表修复之前取消刺激，那么人们会感到安全，并继续消费和投资。如果人们开始觉得这是一个糟糕的情况，并改变他们的行为，那么那一刻资产负债表衰退就已经到来。Richard Koo， 您认为北京在评估资产负债表衰退的威胁时在想什么？领导人和经济顾问是否在否认？北京可能认为房价并没有跌那么多，至少根据官方统计，认为私营部门资产负债表的损失不应该那么大。但我的反驳是，当人们开始相信他们追逐的是错误的资产价格时，资产负债表衰退就会出现。就是那一刻，当日本在1990年陷入资产负债表衰退时，很多人也在否认。他们说，房地产价格在过去55年里从未下跌过，所以这只是小幅调整。但一旦人们意识到他们追逐的是错误的资产价格，恐慌并改变行为，那一刻日本就滑入了资产负债表衰退。许多中国人已经觉得房价不能再上涨了，所以他们想去杠杆化。如果人们开始觉得这是一个糟糕的情况，并改变他们的行为，那么那一刻资产负债表衰退就已经到来。您在美国的学术界和美联储系统都待过很长时间。鉴于中国经济已经失去了一些动力，有人说中国可能永远无法在 GDP 上追赶美国。您怎么看？这一切都取决于中国企业家是否有自由追求他们的梦想，是否有很少的限制或约束，全球市场是否对中国商品完全开放，以及中国是否对来自美国、日本或其他地方的外国投资完全开放。如果所有这些有利条件都到位，我确信中国会在几年内超过美国。但今天，不幸的是，情况并非如此。许多中国人对自己的未来非常担忧，他们变得非常谨慎。外国市场对中国商品的开放程度不如从前，外国直接投资也不像以前那样流入中国。所以，我担心如果我们继续走现在的道路，中国在 GDP 上超过美国的那一天可能永远不会到来。地缘政治似乎也是北京的经济政策制定者无法控制的因素。但在国内，北京有很多事情要做，尤其是如何进一步释放人民的企业家精神，确保私营企业能再次有信心投资。所以，这取决于北京的政策选择，北京是否会继续将政治和国家安全置于经济之上。北京表现出相当强烈的倾向。北京应如何应对这种受地缘政治竞争和脱钩影响的外部环境？许多以前考虑投资扩展产能的中国企业家，现在可能会觉得外国市场不如以前开放。美国、欧洲和日本或西方占全球 GDP 的 56%， 他们的人均 GDP 平均为6万美元。然后是印度、俄罗斯、非洲和拉丁美洲，代表全球 GDP 的 26%， 他们的人均 GDP 平均为 1.3 万美元。所以，这是西方的1/5。如果我是中国企业家销售产品，当全球市场的 56% 不再像以前那样开放时，我必须依赖这剩下的 26%， 我会非常谨慎。我不想在意识到没有市场的时候投资或扩展。所以，我认为这可能是中国企业家变得更加谨慎的原因之一。美国政府一直不仅根据中国如何对待美国来判断中国，还根据中国如何对待其较小的邻国来判断中国，而在这些方面，事情进展不顺，最近与菲律宾的关系，以及与其他国家的紧张关系。我建议中国在对待邻国时要更加小心，因为美国和西方在非常仔细地观察。中国如何对待较小的邻国，可能会影响西方市场对中国商品的开放程度。未来几十年，我们会看到全球供应链的进一步碎片化和更多的地缘政治和经济动荡吗？即使中国走不同的方向，还有很多其他国家在等待中国工厂的到来。越南、印尼、菲律宾、印度、孟加拉国，他们都在非常努力地使自己变得有吸引力，以便更多工厂搬迁到那里， 包括中国的工厂。所以，这与中国开放的前30年非常不同。我在书中称之为中国发展的简单部分。那时候，中国是唯一的选择，它拥有一切优势，所以它成为了世界的工厂。但今天，其他国家从中国学到了经验，说我们必须修复我们的基础设施和海关程序，我们必须教育我们的人民。然后这些国家成为了大竞争者。如果我是中国政府，我会放弃这种信念。无论如何，外国公司都会来中国投资。这在前30年是真的，但现在不再是了。中国必须再次使自己具有吸引力，以便更多工厂会来并留在中国。中国市场如此之大，外国公司应该留在中国。但事实上，许多公司正在搬迁，这表明还有改进的空间。所以，中国可能会因为所有这些脱钩等原因而减少投资和出口，但其他国家会从中受益。越南会从中受益匪浅，印度、印尼、菲律宾，他们都可能从中受益。中国的不幸可能成为其邻国的幸运。所以，如果你从整体上看全球经济，尽管中国经济在放缓，但可能不会有太大影响。这不是一个全球灾难性的情景。您第一次去中国是什么时候？在您看来，中国最大的变化是什么？我第一次去中国是在1992年，我认为那些人在上海是主办方，这是1989年北京天安门镇压后的第一次大型国际会议，所以他们试图为会议提供很多好的东西。对我来说也非常有趣。这是一次相当大的形象重塑，特别是上海，像是一个经济城市。基础设施大大改善了，人类历史上最大的经济增长。人们能够释放他们的能量。中国人非常有企业家精神，他们的能量得到了释放，他们创造了一些绝对了不起的东西。过去的10年并不那么好，所有的改革似乎都停滞了，尽管有所有高尚的承诺。在过去的10年里，经济表现有些混杂。您对中国那些感到沮丧和失望的年轻人有什么建议？他们中的一些人正在经历类似于几年前日本年轻人普遍存在的精神困扰。我记得90年代日本的那个时期，当时公司在裁员，只有那些成绩优异和有出色经验的人才能找到工作，其他人不得不降低他们的期望。但与此同时，日本的 GDP 从未低于泡沫的峰值，所以大多数人都有体面的生活水平。街道保持安全和清洁，社会服务随时可用。所以，如果 GDP 保持不变，你的社会结构保持完整，人们互相帮助，那么衰退不会那么糟糕。如果中国的社会结构和纽带不那么强大，事情开始崩溃，可能会变得更丑陋。很多取决于整个社会以及年轻人如何应对困难。中国的挑战仍然非常艰巨，因为青年失业率很高。我认为，如果年轻人认为生活就像电梯，你上了好学校，从顶尖大学毕业，找到好工作，我担心那个世界已经消失了，确定性已经消失了。你必须更加灵活，你必须适应，你必须睁大眼睛，关注狭窄领域之外的发展。灵活性和学习更多的意愿是非常重要的，不断提升自己的技能，尝试不同的选择和职业道路。
So yes, today we had the first inaugural address by the new incoming, well, already there, Lai Ching-te administration, who's going to reign as president of Taiwan for the next 4 years. And certainly a much watched speech today. And I think he showed very clear awareness that he's being watched internationally. So you see that Lai Ching-te really hit the ground running with his opening section of his remark, where he talked about essentially, I guess, 3 broad things: political status quo, democracy, and alignment issues. And from the very beginning, he tells people that he's elected according and will govern according to the ROC, that's Republic of China Constitution, ROC being the official name of Taiwan at the moment. He also said that his coming to power is a result of the democratic will of the Taiwanese voters. I think that's how he's going about With ROC, he's talking about he's holding on to stability, that he has no immediate plans to change the political status of Taiwan, so to speak. When he talks about he's here as a result of the exercise of democratic will of the Taiwanese voters, he's highlighting a major sort of difference between the two sides of Taiwan Strait, namely Taiwan and Beijing. He also, lastly, he added one more line about how Taiwan is going to be a highlight of quote-unquote global chain of democracies. I think that's him signaling Taiwan's continued strategic alignment under him, namely with the side of democracies, namely going to be pursuing closer relations between Taiwan and US as well as other like-minded democratic partners. More specifically, I think when it comes to cross-strait relations, he's talking about largely similar thing we saw before. He talked about the 4 commitments, which came out of his predecessor, President Tsai's 2021 National Day speech. He talked about also the 4 pillars of peace, something we saw him writing about in his mid-2023 op-ed to the Wall Street Journal. What are some key elements? Key elements, number 1, peace through strength. He's talking about how continue deepening relations with like-minded democracies, continue shoring up of Taiwan's economic security and building Taiwan's deterrence are going to be the most surefire guarantee of Taiwan's continued security. He made one other remark about how he thinks that that accommodationism towards Beijing essentially is not going to be a very effective way to protect Taiwan. He had one line about how no amount of concession Taiwan may make would meaningfully change Beijing's ambition and designs towards Taiwan. So essentially, playing nice to Beijing may buy Taiwan some time, but that's all it is, if that. So peace restraint, number 1. Number 2, dialogue with Beijing on that issue. I think his general attitude is one of conditional yes. He's saying, according to his 4th pillar, finding so-called 4 pillars of peace, he's talking about how under him, Taiwan will exercise principled and stable leadership on cross-strait relations. Principled meaning that Taiwan will not be making the kind of concessions that Beijing may want. Leadership means that Taiwan under him will be open to dialogue between Beijing and Taiwan. However, it will not be happening, dialogue will not be happening under the preconditions unilaterally dictated to by Beijing. And instead, he proposed Taiwan's own formula for the rightful conditions under which dialogue should take place, namely that talks need to take place on the basis of equality and mutual respect between the two sides. So I think these are the broader messages he's trying to tell people, that he's committed to the status quo. He's taking clear alignment with democracies. And when it comes to defense, it will be peaceful strength rather than diplomatic or other political concessions. And lastly, when it comes to dialogue, Taiwan's doors always open, but they need to find the right atmosphere for it, and namely that both sides need to see each other as peers and willing to talk to each other as equals, rather than as giving Beijing the right to unilaterally set preconditions. So that's my time.
Thanks very much, Wendy. And now I'm going to throw to Elizabeth for some opening remarks.
Hi, Elizabeth Alaris here. I'm non-resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council Global China Hub. I'm over here near Washington, and so I will direct, my comments to the view from Washington, and particularly, Taiwan's relations, with Washington. I anticipate that President Lai will come out of the gate strong to strengthen relations with the United States. Certainly has his Vice President, Bi Kim-hsiao, as an asset. She will be instrumental, having been the former ambassador from Taiwan to Washington. Taiwan, as you know, enjoys very good relations with Congress as well as with the White House. President Biden had said on several occasions that the U.S. would militarily defend Taiwan. And, the U.S. has an election coming up in November. And right now, polls are indicating it could be either Biden or Trump. And I know some people are skittish about Trump. However, under the Trump administration, we saw a flurry, actually the most congressional legislation on protecting Taiwan. They were, I would say in the last 6 years, Trump and Biden administrations, there's been 7 to 10 pieces of legislation, that is joint resolutions, acts, other things, laws, that have been directed to protecting Taiwan. I anticipate that will continue. Congress is very defensive of Taiwan. It is willing to sell, most of the arms that Taiwan seeks. And that, again, the White House, I anticipate will still, regardless of some of the rhetoric, will still seek good relations with Taiwan. And as far as Taiwan officials coming over to Washington, we will, very soon, I'm sure, anticipate seeing people coming over to strengthen and deepen those ties.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And finally, we'll turn to Lev.
Thank you so much, Atlantic Council, for putting this on. I think if there's one thing that William Lai has tried to sell to the world for the last 2.5 years is that he is going to beat Tsai Ing-wen 2.0. And I think his speech today really kind of cements that selling point. So much of what we heard today was not new. I think pretty much every major theme that William Lai touched on is something that the DPP under Tsai has really begun to put forward over the last 8 years. And most importantly, there's always this air of skepticism still from some about William Lai secretly wanting to, go against the status quo, and that in his heart of hearts, he secretly has these pro-independence leanings. And I think there's enough structural reasons at this point, combined with today's speech, that really show that that's not going to happen. So first of all, William Lai knows that public opinion in Taiwan, based off of decades of public opinion survey data, that people in Taiwan don't want to change the status quo. And that if he was to enact any sort of change to the status quo, it would be electoral suicide for him and his party. Two, the legislative yuan is in chaos in Taiwan right now, which means that even if he wants to pass any major legislation, it's literally impossible. And finally, he knows that America does not want him to cross any red lines or become more provocative than he has to. All of that was reflected in today's speech. And whether or not in his heart of hearts he has some personal opinion about the future of Taiwan, because of these structural conditions, I think we're going to see a very stable Lai administration that does not follow, that does not stray too far from what Tsai has put forth for the last 8 years. However, it is worth noting that depending on who does win in the United States this fall, that there is major potential for change in East Asia, even though under the last Trump administration, there were those in the administration that did good work on Taiwan. None of those people are likely to return to a second Trump administration, especially, good folks like Matt Pottinger, whose bridges have been burned with Donald Trump, that a Donald Trump presidency would really sort of bring a new level of uncertainty to the region. And so even though we're able to be optimistic for the William Lai administration from now until November, I think really what we have to focus on is what happens in the United States following that. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Lev. And I'd like to just to start to follow up on some of that. I mean, Lai may be looking to be Tsai 2.0, but he's domestically and politically not facing a Tsai 2.0 situation. As we know, the DPP didn't win the majority in the legislative yuan this time around, a first in 8 years, and now they're facing off against this KMT TPP alliance there. When we saw Han Kuo-yu, a former KMT presidential nominee, was in February chosen as a speaker. I mean, there's a handful of factors there that are going to make things very, very challenging for him. So what is his potential to actually push forward policy in line with, the wants of the DPP there?
As of now, practically zero. So first of all, in William Lai's speech today, he put the need for unity and coming together by parties as the first major point of his speech, which was the correct decision because it is currently the biggest problem in Taiwan. Nothing is going to happen productively in the legislative yuan until parties begin to work together. Instead, we're going to, for those who did not know, there was a major brawl in Taiwan's legislative yuan last week. And I don't think that's going to be the last one we see under the Lai administration, because the DPP, who does not have a majority in the Legislative Yuan, is currently being stared down the barrel of the gun of the TPP and the KMT, who have decided that their main goal in the Legislative Yuan is to make life more difficult for the DPP. And what that's going to lead to is the DPP's inability to sort of push any agenda. William Lai himself is going to face a very tough time trying to provide any deliverables for Taiwanese voters. As of now, the KMT and the TPP have no incentive to work with the DPP. They just had a very successful election, and they are feeling very confident in their ability to sort of dictate the pacing and the tone of the Legislative Yuan. The TPP, the third party that has this sort of kingmaker position with their 8 legislators, has especially shown their true colors during the very first vote in which the Speaker of the Legislative Yuan was elected. The TPP just walked out of the vote. And I think that really was indicative of how they feel about how they want to present themselves and how much they want to play along in Taiwan's legislature. So William Lai is going to have a really tough time passing policy. The DPP is going to have a really tough time passing policy. And how that's going to translate into future electoral success as we think about, say, the 2026 local elections, or let alone the 2028 next national elections, William Lai has his hands full. And even though with major issues like foreign policy, cross-strait relations, he's able to set the tone himself. When it comes to any sort of domestic agenda, William Lai is currently having to convince all parties to work together, which in Taiwanese politics, just like American politics, is really difficult.
Thanks, Lev. And probably the best manifestation of that we saw on Friday, when a literal fist fight broke out between lawmakers of the KMT, the TPP and the DPP over there. Just a really quick follow-up question. What do you make of the loss of the youth vote and what that means for setting an agenda?
Yeah, so it's a good question because we're all very interested in what the youth vote really represents. A lot of my work this last semester, I've been conducting focus groups with college students all over Taiwan for the last 6 months to try to really understand this youth vote. And it's worth keeping in mind because a lot of people think that the reason the TPP did so well was because of the youth vote. We know that just from demographics, there's about 900,000, less than 1 million youth votes in Taiwan. And if you look at how many votes Ko Wen-je received, he received 2.6 million votes, which means that a lot of people who voted for Ko Wen-je were not young voters. That's also assuming that every young voter voted for Ko, which I don't think is true. Which means even though there's sort of this disproportionate attention paid to the youth vote and its relationship with the TPP and Ko Wen-je, there's far more voters that are becoming sympathetic to the TPP. I was just at the TPP's rally on Sunday to observe what their framing and messaging was, and there were a heck of a lot of different generations being represented there, where I think we have to sort of expand our understanding of the aggrieved Taiwanese voter to not just be young people, although young people are certainly not very happy with the political climate here at the moment.
Thanks, Lev. And turning to Wen-ti, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some of the things you said in your opening remarks. So obviously in Lai's speech today, he, not very surprisingly, called for Beijing to stop threatening the island. Beijing in turn responded that Lai was sending very dangerous signals and called the situation grim and complex. It's no secret they see Lai as a dangerous separatist. But more broadly, I mean, how should we view the future of cross-strait relations under Lai? I mean, what are the big factors, the big issues that Lai will face in the presidency, and perhaps how do they differ from the last 4 years?
Right. So the most straightforward point is, as mentioned before, that this will be the first time in a long time when you have separation of powers, essentially, in Taiwan's government, when the executive and the legislative belong to 2 different parties. Those are going to create complications, I think, both in terms of enabling or disabling Taiwan to negotiate with Beijing from the position of strength. It may also create some complications in terms of Taiwan's attempt to deepen cooperation with other like-minded partners and friends as well. U.S. arms sales, for example, those are kind of things that require major budget to be passed in the parliament. to enable, to speed up. And with opposition-controlled parliament, when at a time when there's rising anti-establishment sentiment, just like there is around many other corners of the world, I think one natural way to frame it for the opposition is to say that, hey, this is like, let's do more butter over gun barrels, should we say. So I think that's one issue that's going to create complications in terms of Taiwan's ability to approach Beijing with confidence. One other issue that comes to mind also is about how Lai Ching-te, I think he has a certain image that I think many commentators refer to, that they call him well, actually he mentioned himself that he once called himself about around 2017, when he called himself a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. I think ever since then, he's underscored that the key word there in that line is pragmatic. And indeed, in the same speech, he's added quite a number of other things, e.g. that he's committed to the ROC constitution, essentially the status quo, and that he's any change to the status quo will have to come through in the manifestation of the popular will of the Taiwanese people, and most likely in the form of a popular referendum, i.e., if any change were to happen, even were Lai Ching-te to be in power, he's not going to be the one who calls the shot, who makes a decision. It's going to be the Taiwanese people, and who can be against the will of the people, right? So essentially, it's outsourcing that politically problematic issue in a way in Beijing's eyes. So really, I think, however, in spite of all those nuances he added back then, the pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence is a label, the bumper sticker, if you will, that's stuck. And Beijing has certainly been using it to be giving Lai Ching-te a relatively difficult time. And so Lai really, in that sense, if a conciliatory approach towards Beijing is what Lai Ching-te want to pursue, then he has some more work that remains to be done. I think, just to give an example, and do stop me if I'm going too long on this one single question, but to give you an example, there were some soothing bombs, some consolation prizes that previous President Tsai used to give to Beijing that we're not seeing as much of from the Lai speech today. So, for example, 8 years ago, same deal, Beijing would ask President Tsai to endorse the 1992 consensus, which manifests the One China principle. It was a no-go for any DPP government, honestly. So President Tsai 8 years ago did not endorse the 92 consensus nor the One China principle. However, she gave a consolation prize. She said, let's work together based on the spirit of 1992. Or let's treasure and preserve the subtle understandings that both sides have strived towards reaching around the 1992 talks. Those are kind of things that are soothing bombs in a sense, or at least consolation prizes that President Tsai used to dish out. We haven't seen as much coming out of Lai recently. So I think it remains to be seen at this point in the coming months, whether Lai will try to do something to the similar effect. And if so, whether that pragmatic work for a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence bumper sticker will still remain as big a problem as it has been.
Thanks, Wenty. And just a really quick follow-up. I'm wondering whether you think from Beijing's perspective, they see Lai as a fundamentally different, how they see him as fundamentally different from Tsai, and, how that might play into the relations over the next 4 years.
Yes, so I think Beijing probably give Lai Ching-te even less benefit of the doubt than Beijing used to give to President Tsai. And obviously, Taiwan domestic politics is going to be very complicated, but if I were to oversimplify it, one could argue that DPP may be made out of two broad wings, so to speak. There's the more progressive wing of the party, and there's the more Taiwanese national wing of the party. The stereotype is that Lai comes from more national wing of the party, whereas President Tsai comes from the more progressive wing. And therefore, people will point to data points such as how Taiwan was able to legalized the push for same-sex marriage around 2019 under President Tsai's reign. So again, going to be a gross oversimplification, but I think that's a general stereotype. So that's also one reason why also that Beijing may be harboring some suspicion about what this Lai really think is heart of hearts. But then again, like I wrote about in a recent piece for the New Atlanticist for the Atlantic Council, that bumper sticker as pragmatic pursuit or as a national wing figure, that could be a liability in working with Beijing, but it could also be an asset. So precisely because Lai may be pursued as more of a favorite son of the national wing of the DPP, that also means, however, while it attracts more suspicion from Beijing, it also attracts Lai more trust from the national wing of the party, and therefore from the most Beijing skeptical part of Taiwan. So if Beijing were willing to work with Lai Ching-te, that could actually mean that Lai would be able to have much more room to maneuver in terms of negotiating with Beijing. And if they were ever to sign anything, Lai's ability to have any agreement ratified or endorsed domestically will be greater than any president in a long time. So really, it could be a liability, but it could also be an asset. So it really down to Beijing about how high a priority that really places on meaningful cross-strait stabilization and progress.
Thanks, Wen-Ti. And turning to Liz now, I wanted to ask a little bit more about Taiwan and the international space. So as we know, Taiwan has a diminishing presence in the international community in recent years. Almost as soon as Lai was elected, Nauru switched its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China. Within a space of days, they now have around, I want to say 12, I hope I'm not wrong, diplomatic allies. We also saw a lot of consternation over a potential switch by Tuvalu earlier this year. And Taiwan is experiencing this not just in diplomatic recognition, but across a lot of other arenas in international cooperation. So I'm curious, how should we view the trajectory of Taiwan's shrinking international space and what Lai will be looking at in the next 4 years?
It does appear that the natural trajectory is countries jettisoning Taiwan for China, for the PRC. So I do anticipate that there will be some switching under the Lai administration. You look at the major powers and the major economies in the world, and they have official diplomatic relations with the PRC, not with Taiwan. So, unfortunately for Taiwan, there does seem to be this pull to China for various, reasons that I think most of us know about, economic power and hedging one's bets. And then there's Taiwan that, does have shrinking international space. Now, of course, the Tsai administration was very effective at expanding unofficial ties. And those should not be, poo-pooed or, discounted because the reality is, again, the major powers all have official ties with Beijing. So does that leave Taiwan out in the cold? No, that means Taiwan can still have, of course, extremely robust economic relations, social, cultural, educational, relations with other countries. And the more that Taiwan can expand its unofficial diplomatic space, of course, the stronger that makes Taiwan. People like Taiwan, my gosh, look at the US administration. You have the top presidential contenders, both trying to prove themselves to be the toughest on China, right? A lot of countries are like that as well. And so we've seen that, China's approval rating, worldwide has really plummeted. Most, it was 80%, of Americans do not like China. I had a Fulbright over in Europe right before and during COVID. And, when I was writing my proposal, most of the countries in Europe liked China. I was going to do a lot of research on Europe, China relations. Well, especially after COVID, those views of China plummeted. However, views of Taiwan have gone up tremendously. And Taiwan now has more sister city relationships, those unofficial, types exchanges than ever before. So I think that's really where the Lai administration is going to work. It has an uphill battle in the UN and its associated bodies. The UN is nearly in China's pocket, if we can be honest. And so wherever the US can support Taiwan and international organizations that are perhaps not associated with the UN, the US really needs to help Taiwan out there. And that's the golden spot where Taiwan really needs to put its efforts, is in those associations that are perhaps not associated with the UN.
Thanks, Liz. And just a really quick follow-up. I'm curious how you see Lai as a diplomat compared to Tsai.
Lai does not have as much international experience, and that is perhaps, one of the reasons why he brought on, or at least, the party brought on Bi Kim-hsiao. She has, very good relations, of course, not just with Washington, but she was in Europe, not long ago. So she has very, very good international relations credentials. Also, if you look at the Lai administration, it's a lot of the foreign policy people just in different positions. Joseph Wu is staying on, but not as, Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is now the National Security Council chief. Wellington Koo is now, Minister of Defense. There are a number of people, Lin Jialong doesn't necessarily have a lengthy or doesn't have a lot of deep, diplomatic experience, but he's close to Lai. And so part of it is, the team. How effective can this team be in its diplomatic initiatives with countries?
Thanks, Liz. And turning to Lev again. Lev, I wanted to ask briefly, and I know he covered some of this in his speech today, but it's very quick to turn around much of an analysis on that. But I wanted to ask briefly how we should be looking at Taiwan's economic relationships, just regionally as well as internationally. What are the big factors that Lai will be looking to tackle in this term?
I think the decades hopeful and hopefully eventually realized bilateral trade agreement between Taiwan and the United States, which talks have been going on for quite some time. I mean, it feels crazy to think back to the great ractopamine scandal of the Tsai administration, where she allowed ractopamine treated pork to be sold in Taiwan for the sake of being able to begin a dialogue about a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. And it's now 2024 and we're still on early rounds of negotiations with some sort of trade agreement. I know everyone in Taiwan is incredibly hopeful to eventually get double taxation removed, and there's been rumors that that's going away, but it still hasn't happened. So I think these are some of the biggest issues that I think both people in Taiwan and outside of Taiwan are going to be very hopeful for. As others have already commented on, I think we're going to see a pursuit of more robust economic relationships with Taiwan's newfound allies in Eastern Europe, as well as the rest of the world that Tsai has begun to build off of, especially during COVID with a lot of, the Taiwan Can Help campaign. Even though it's not an international issue, it's worth focusing a second on domestic economic policy, because if there's something that most Taiwanese voters who did not vote for Lai and say voted for Ko-Enja in the 2020 election were aggrieved by the DPP for, was because of a lack of economic policy that domestically was felt by the average Taiwanese person. And that's not something that was really relevant in Lai's speech today, even though he paid lip service to, we need to do something about wages, we need to do something about employment, and we need to do something about the rising cost of housing. There really weren't any concrete proposals in his speech about what exactly he would like to do himself as president. And that was really, I think, if there was one shortcoming that I thought was particularly obvious for me, it was kind of a lack of meaningful domestic economic policy proposals that spoke to that very large and vocal aggrieved body of Taiwanese voters. And that's something that I think he needs to be careful of, especially given the status of the Legislative Yuan.
Thanks, Lev. And of course, it's impossible to talk about Taiwan's economy without mentioning semiconductors. So I have a question for Wen-Ti here. When we talk about Taiwan's economic place. They make around, I believe it's 70% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the high-end semiconductors. I mean, what's Taiwan's future as a cog in that high-end technology value chain? What would be the key ideas that Lai would be thinking about here as he steps into the presidency in terms of the semiconductor industry there?
Yeah, I mean, Lai basically talked about semiconductor as well in his inaugural address. Essentially, he's trying to say that Taiwan, well, pillar 2 of his speech, actually, he talked about pillar 2 of peace when he talked about how economic security is also national security. Also part of his speech, he also talks about how Taiwan's place in the global supply chain for semiconductor and other higher-end technology sectors is one meaningful safeguard for Taiwan's security as well. So as part and parcel of that, I think Taiwan is going to continue to come itself to the broader friendshoring approach, as we've been seeing. We see Taiwan begin to share the semiconductor industries. I believe they established a factory in Arizona. They are doing one in Germany, in Japan as well. Again, some in Taiwan harbor suspicions about it. Some people be saying if Taiwan's claim to semiconductor prowess is one reason, one way why Taiwan is indispensable, then Taiwan cannot get a silicon shield out of it, that people cannot live without it, therefore they cannot let it fall. However, there's one other way to look at it as well. I think Taiwan government is a lot more proactive in looking at this issue when they're like, well, if Taiwan spreads their wings of the semiconductor industry and establish their presence in other friendly countries, they will be able to further integrate themselves into the local society, local economy, and therefore over time, not only is more people-to-people exchange a meaningful soft power exercise, but also it's going to help build up more locally based constituencies in those friendly countries in which TSMC has an increasingly presence. That's going to go some way as well into the helping supposedly friendly government, including friendly governments, political leaders who have those constituencies to work with to help Taiwan as well. So I think in that sense, economic engagement is a soft power building exercise as well, which may get those countries to help Taiwan. So longer term game, I suppose. But again, that's, I think, one reason why Taiwan's place in the global economy today is so interesting.
Thanks, Wendy. I mean, you bring up, the friendshoring, and that's something I wanted to also ask Liz about. Looking at Taiwan's greater role in securing supply chains, I mean, how should we be looking at Taiwan's potential future as a friendshoring destination? A destination for countries, including the US, to reduce economic reliance on Beijing. I mean, what's the extent of the role that they can play there, given their security situation and their political situation?
Well, there are reasonable prospects for Taiwan to grow as a friendshoring destination for businesses, and certainly there's a definite need for it, on Taiwan. Particularly, let's first talk about technology industries such as computer chips, electronics. Those industries, they don't exist in a vacuum, right? Even TSMC, gets, designed from the United States. Netherlands, Japan make the chip making equipment. So there's a lot of bits and pieces from other countries that go into TSMC, and TSMC cannot function, without close international collaboration with leading companies and suppliers from other countries. And so there's certainly an opportunity for those businesses, to friendshore on Taiwan. Taiwan, as we know, excels at math education and what we in the US call like STEM, education, science, technology. And so Taiwan would certainly also benefit from an influx of talent and investment. Couple that with their education system, and Taiwan can do, amazing things. Right now, there are some barriers to entry to foreign countries and foreign businesses from foreign countries. Those need to be lowered. I'm sure Lai administration is, well aware of those, as well as the double taxation problem. That's an issue. But also, there's incredible need for friendshoring, on Taiwan. The more foreign investment, the more foreign talent, the more foreign involvement in Taiwan, honestly, the more secure Taiwan is. If Taiwan, it's maybe a bit of a stretch to say if Taiwan is more akin to like a Singapore, China is less likely to attack it. At least, that's one mentality. Those who say, Taiwan needs to move its own industries, out of Taiwan for its safety, airlift, those industries out of Taiwan, are actually leaving Taiwan more vulnerable. And so, I was looking at an AmCham, a very recent AmCham report about, business sentiment on Taiwan, and the businesses that are there now, actually 92% of them expect to expand at least in human capital terms, right? And so, and the Taiwan companies that have left China because of, various factors, they've relocated to Taiwan for the most part. They haven't gone like to Mexico. They haven't abandoned Taiwan and gone elsewhere after leaving China. And so, and even, in a poll of businesses in Taiwan that AmCham did, when it talked about, uncertainty, like, was there enough uncertainty in Taiwan to make these companies think twice about continuing operating there or leaving? More than 92% said they were going to, stay for the long haul. And so, the United States and foreign businesses really do need to look seriously at friendshoring on Taiwan as a way of supporting, Taiwan. We know that if Taiwan falls to, China's clutches, that's not just going to be bad for Taiwan, it's going to be bad for the United States and for the West. China has made it very, very clear that its agenda is to displace the United States as a global power. And, taking Taiwan is part of that agenda. So that's a step. The legislation is there, right? It conveys the sense of Congress, that Congress has Taiwan's back. And Biden administration, if it continues, after, January of next year, is pretty clearly committed to the security of Taiwan's national, defense. Trump administration, I think that if you push Trump's hand, as Congress has done for previous presidents, that he will also defend Taiwan because he is, and not necessarily militarily, I don't know there, but I'm saying that will, defend Taiwan's democracy because it's not China. We don't know in January if there's going to be a Democratic House. There's a possibility we'll have, Trump as president, but a Democratic House and the Senate, I don't know. So we would have divided government, which would honestly, I think, be, in Taiwan's favor because it would really, really, I think, support Taiwan.
Thanks, Liz. And we're going to go to questions shortly. I have one more question for our panelists, but we're going to go to questions shortly. So just a reminder that if you want to submit a question, please go to askac.org. And finally, and I might throw this one to Wendy, what are the specific defense challenges that Taiwan is going to face in the coming years? And I'm curious to hear about it within the context of the changing China-US relationship and how things like these the flights near Taiwan and patrols have changed as that relationship has changed.
Yes, structurally, one major issue, of course, is going to be continue securing working defense relationship with the U.S. for sure. And one other issue related to parliamentary divisions is that there are elements of defense and security cooperation that require sometimes a level of confidentiality. And sometimes when the government and legislature are run by different parties, when naturally the legislature won't great oversight, won't get transparency, so they have leverage to do the work. Those trade-off inevitably between transparency and confidentiality may sometimes pose a challenge to the timeliness of some of U.S.-Taiwan defense and security cooperation items. I think that's one factor. The other one factor you mentioned about on a more cross-strait basis, it's the risk of accidental escalation militarily. I think those are increasing by the day. With every PLA military jets that flies near Taiwan, with every PLA warships that sail to waters near Taiwan, including near Taiwan's offshore islands. That creates a political pressure for Taiwan as well as other like-minded friends and partners to engage in probably not comparable, but in engaging in other actions, deployment of their own military assets in the vicinity to show that those are not entirely Chinese jurisdictions to move like that militarily. And we see this, of course, you could have a warning shot going wrong, flying astray, and then somebody may get hurt at some point. That's one factor. One other factor is that we're also seeing expansion of the way that China uses their gray zone security maneuvers. We're seeing them moving away from just purely military assets deployments, then moving towards paramilitary, and when there's a civilian adjacent, by that I mean law enforcement, China's coast guards, for example, that are operating near waters near Taiwan's offshore islands. So you're increasingly blurring the line between military behavior and civilian sphere, and with more diversity, more complexity of people, assets, and sectors that's got involved in this game of chicken started by China, there's even more risk that things can go accidentally wrong. So I think those are issues that we should be watching out for.
Thanks, Wendy. Certainly an issue that, as we've seen, that can turn on a dime. So I'm going to turn to some questions now for our panelists. Our first one is from Fred, and I think I'm going to direct this one at Lev. He says, thank you for organizing the event. I attended a Hoover event a few years ago, which focused on the economic relationship between China and Taiwan. It changed during different times between different Taiwanese regimes. So if the executive and legislative branches have different heads, how is this going to affect the economic relationship between the two countries? And if the new Taiwanese government wants to keep good relationship with similar democracies, it will be tough because some of those countries do not belong to the side of China in the world of politics. Lev, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So something that was novel about Joe Biden's election was that it was the first time that the DPP has been in power in Taiwan while a Democratic Party has been in power in the United States. Just from electoral outcomes, coincidentally, I like to think that there's not a grand conspiracy that made this happen. In the past, it was always if there was a Republican Party in power, the DPP was in power, and if there was a Democratic Party in power, the KMT was in power. So the last 4 years have actually been a bit of a new ground for U.S.-Taiwan relations, because it's the first time we've seen a Democratic president with a DPP president. And I think people here in Taiwan have always had this skepticism of the Democratic Party because Republicans are more vocal on Taiwan, although that doesn't actually mean that Democrats don't care. We know that Democrats and Republicans historically have always supported Taiwan bipartisanly. Every bill that's ever passed has been bipartisan. And especially after the Nancy Pelosi visit, we really saw a huge uptick in vocal support for Democrats in Taiwan than we had really ever seen before. I like to make the joke that Taiwan is the only place in the world where Mike Pompeo and Nancy Pelosi are both dearly loved because of how bipartisanship has managed to exist in Taiwan. And so, you know, that's because I think in a large part of a lot of diplomatic efforts by Taiwan to make sure that they have good relations with both parties. You know, the Taiwanese diplomats, especially those like Xiaobin Kim, work extremely hard to make sure that they are on good terms with all political actors in whatever country they are having to work with. And I think the biggest challenge has been in the past that countries are very unsure about how to navigate relations with Taiwan in a way that does not come at the expense of their relationship with the PRC. And I think Taiwan going forward has gotten very good at being able to offer countries a lot without crossing that red line. I think, you know, a lot of what Tsai had done, especially during COVID, was to frame Taiwan as a global leader, regardless of China. The whole Taiwan Can Help campaign wasn't focused on the PRC. It was simply focused on how Taiwan can be a goodwill actor. And I think that was extremely helpful for countries who may feel skeptical to work with Taiwan to see that Taiwan isn't trying to inherently mess with their relationship with China, but is just trying to be another good global citizen.
Thanks, Lev. And to our next question, it's a very straightforward question, the kind of question an annoying journalist like myself might ask. So I'm going to direct this one at Liz. If a Trump presidency returns, the US-China relationship may worsen, but if Biden remains as POTUS, US-Russia relationship may worsen, which may affect the US-China relationship. So which presidency is better for the China-Taiwan relationship?
Yeah, this one's putting a new wrinkle in my brain. Certainly, no matter who comes in November, the U.S.-Russia relationship is going to, worsen. So yeah, of course, China now has a very special relationship with Russia. So now we've got some really interesting triangulation, going on there. Again, some of this comes down to the diplomatic team. If Trump comes in, as Lev, had mentioned, Pottinger is out. Like, who's going to be in his team? And I could anticipate, a couple of people who are likely to be on that team, and they are very critical of China. So I think that as U.S. relationship with China, either stays the same or deteriorates, I don't see it getting a lot better. I think that is problematic for Taiwan. I mean, what Taiwan and what the region really needs is like some stability, right? Even like businesses want to know, the stock market, likes predictability, stability. And I think there's so many balls in the air with who's coming into the White House, who's going to, form the majority in the Senate, who's going to be the Senate, but more so the House, who's going to be Speaker of the House, who's going to be the foreign relations team. All of that is unknown right now. And so, yeah, there's too much, I think, uncertainty to be able to answer this question honestly. I think that the ball is more in Taiwan's and China's court. I think that, Lai very clearly stating that Taiwan is not subordinate to Beijing. Beijing is always like, oh, Taiwan's our little brother, all one family kind of thing. It's like, nah, we don't want to be a little brother, right? We're not subordinate to you. However, we do want to talk. I think that's extremely important, that the ball is in, Taiwan's court, and that it is continuously expressing a willingness to engage. You know what? Forget the official level of politics. Let's look at what's going on. Like, the public never even hears about, some delegation, unofficial delegation that went over. For goodness sakes, we've got Wellington Koo back in office. How many centuries later here, right? And so, like, I think what's going to happen under the radar is probably more important, because unfortunately, these people running the show, they're politicians, right? And they're hogging the spotlight, and they're getting out there, and I'm tough, and I'm this and that, and I'm tough on China. I defend, Taiwan, and I go there and I get a great banquet. Isn't that great? But, it's more those unofficial delegations that are going over quietly that we hear about, like maybe 2 weeks, a month later. I think that's where the real activity is going to be. And that's where it's really important the United States, Taiwan, and China meet.
Thanks, Liz. And we have space for just one more brief question. And I'm going to, again, on defense, I'm going to direct this at Wenty. What's your view of the trade-off between US military assistance of Ukraine and Israel versus Taiwan? Does the United States have enough resources to support security in all three regions? If not, how should the US balance all of these priorities?
Right. I mean, you balance priority as the way people always do, which is you rank them by importance and urgency. And whichever one is important and urgent, you go there first. So I think it's how you see this in how Lai Ching-te approaches as well in his inaugural address, when he's basically like, he sees Taiwan as the quote unquote spotlight in the global chain of democracies, unquote. So I think in that sense, he's making a clear statement in terms of Taiwan's decision to align itself with democratic camps internationally. you see that also that Taiwan wants, as they used to do under Tsai Ing-wen, who always talk about being predictable and pragmatic, you're going to see Taiwan under like trying to play the role of an understanding partner as well to US and other like-minded countries, in a sense that Taiwan understands that Taiwan's security depends not only on its own defense, not only on its economic importance to the world, but also rests in part on Taiwan's soft power, which is ultimately anchored on Taiwan's own democratic values. So in that sense, what's good for other democracies around the world is going to be good for the longer term cohesions for the democratic camp in the aggregate, and therefore better for the sustainability of longer term support for Taiwan itself as well. So in that sense, I think Taiwan sees the interdependence between the security of itself and other democracies around the world. So in that sense, I think Taiwan also will try to tell people, Taiwan doesn't even actually have to tell people. Xi Jinping told us when Xi Jinping talked with Biden, right, that Taiwan straight, so-called plan to invade Taiwan by 2027 or 2035. Xi Jinping didn't know where Biden heard from, but Xi Jinping didn't see such proposal from his own subordinates. So in that sense, while Taiwan security is an important issue for sure, the stakes are high, the urgency level may not be the highest among democracies in need of support at this juncture. So in that sense, being a longer-term sustainable understanding friend, Taiwan will not have much problem in terms of US providing support to perhaps other friends in the meantime, and come back to Taiwan, not necessarily afterwards, but doesn't have to make Taiwan the highest or singular priority at this juncture. I think that's what friends do, that when you are in need, and try not to be too demanding on you at this juncture.
Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi died on Sunday when a helicopter carrying him and a delegation of other Iranian officials crash-landed in the mountains of northern Iran, throwing the future of the country and the region into further doubt. Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian and other top officials were also killed in the crash as the group was traveling in Iran's East Azerbaijan province, the Iranian state-run Islamic Republic news agency confirmed. Dense fog impeded search and rescue operations for hours before the crash site was found. The fog was so thick that it forced the Iranians to call on the support of European Union satellites to help locate the helicopter. Raisi's death puts a coda on a short but transformative era in Iranian politics that saw the country lurch in a hardline direction and threatened to bring the Middle East to the brink of regional war. In nearly 3 years in power, Raisi moved Iran's domestic politics and social policy in a more conservative direction and pushed the country further into the role of clear U.S. antagonist in the region after his predecessor, Hassan Rouhani, who defeated him in the 2017 presidential election, first sought a détente with the West over Iran's nuclear program before stepping up proxy attacks. An Islamic jurist noted for his close relationship with Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and considered by many officials and experts as a likely candidate to succeed the aging supreme leader, Raisi's tenure saw Iran speed up uranium enrichment and slow down negotiations on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action after the United States exited the deal in 2018, 3 years before he came into office. Iran under Raisi also supported Russia in its war against Ukraine with extensive exports of Shahed suicide drones and artillery, increased attacks by regional proxy militias against the United States and Israel after Hamas's October 2023 cross-border attack on Israel, and just a month before his death launched a massive drone and missile attack against Israel. Experts say that regardless of who replaces Raisi, the strategy he pursued is unlikely to change, having been solidified among the higher echelons of Iran's political and clerical leadership. With Raisi, without Raisi, the regime is quite content with the way the post-October 7 Middle East has been shaking out, said Behnam Ben Tailblue, a senior fellow focused on Iran at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD. It's been able to continue its death by a thousand cuts strategy, firing directly against the US and Israel via proxy and then even directly a few times itself with the tit-for-tat you saw in April, and still look like it won the round. Under the Iranian constitution, First Vice President Mohammad Mokbar is likely to fill in as head of the cabinet for the next 50 days until elections can be called. Recent parliamentary elections drew record-low turnouts, analysts said. What's more, significant effort was expended by Khamenei and his allies to ensure Raisi's win during the last presidential election in 2021, disqualifying potential rivals. Before becoming president, Raisi served on Iran's prosecution committee that was responsible for executing an estimated 5,000 dissidents in 1988. He had been accused of crimes against humanity by the United Nations and was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department. And that heavy-handed approach continued with the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in the custody of Iran's morality police in September 2022 after allegedly not wearing a hijab properly in public, which sparked nationwide protests. Beyond the horizon of snap elections and the presidential election set for next year, there is potential for upheaval at the top of Iran's ruling class. With a short line of possible successors to the 85-year-old Khamenei, other than the head of state's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, Raisi's death could throw the country's political future into further turmoil. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the largest branch of the Iranian armed forces that controls major swaths of the country's economy, could also use the upheaval to strengthen its hand. There is no heir apparent if he's gone, said David Des-Roches, a professor at the National Defense University's Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies and retired U.S. Army colonel. What's really interesting is to see if the IRGC will basically complete a slow-motion coup. As rescue workers searched for Raisi's downed helicopter, state media asked the Iranian people to pray for him. Instead, in the wake of reports of the crash, some Iranians appeared to light celebratory fireworks, cheering the demise of the hardline leader. Today's crash and likely death of President Raisi and his foreign minister will shake up Iranian politics, Afshan Ostavar, an associate professor at the Naval Postgraduate School and a longtime Iran expert, wrote in a post on X before the president's death had been confirmed. Regardless of the cause, perceptions of foul play will be rife within the regime. Ambitious elements may press for advantage, compelling reactions from other parts of the regime. Buckle up. While experts said it was unlikely that a liberalizing figure would emerge in either snap elections or Iran's 2025 presidential election, Raisi's death could leave a small opening for resurgent protest movements that have persisted under the surface. These movements are not dead, said Ben Tailblue, the FDD expert. They operate on the low level, on the periphery, usually strikes, labor unions, that kind of thing. It could lead to a nationwide trigger, and it could be a nothing burger. But the story of the Iranian protest movement is always a matter of when and not if.